The coal was no longer a threat. It was a companion. The coal didn't lie. It simply killed. Evelyn Hayes stumbled through knee-deep snow in the Shadowfell Mountains, the wind a sustained, high-pitched shriek, a choir of tormented souls. She'd been walking 3 days, but the true terror wasn't the frigid grip on her body. It was the sound. The rhythmic, steady growl of Silas Thorne's hounds was close. It was an inevitable death clock counting down. Yet beneath the distant baying, another sound echoed in the white static of the blizzard. A tinny, fragmented musical chime, the hollow ring of the music box. Evelyn's eyes focused on a shard of purple-tinted ice. In its distorted reflection, she saw Lillian's face, eyes wide in the dark. "Chimes are meant to comfort, Evelyn," Lillian's voice hissed from inside her skull. "Do you remember the tune? The one you played while I starved?" Evelyn shook her head, the blood from her split lip mixing with the cold moisture. She began to run, not from Silas, but from her own memory. She had to escape this nightmare, or finally accept that she had carried the fortress with her. That was Evelyn Hayes in the last moments of sanity. But to understand why the fortress became psychological and why she preferred its destruction to continuing to live, we must rewind half a year. We must return to New Haven, where her tragedy began with a gift that foretold a beautiful lie. Act Y, The Hollow Promise. The Stitches of Desperation, New Haven, Connecticut, July. Even in the height of summer, the air in Evelyn Hayes' cramped boarding house room felt heavy with the scent of cheap medicine and unyielding despair. Evelyn, 23, was a skilled seamstress. Her hands could execute a perfect stitch on silk, yet they were powerless against the consumption consuming her younger sister Lillian. Evelyn was not driven by whimsy, she was driven by cold logic. She measured hope in the shillings that bought laudanum, the only thing masking Lillian's suffering. The dream was not romance, the dream was clean air, the desperate delusion that a mere change of geography could rewrite Lillian's fate. The advertisement was circled in ink. Successful Dakota rancher seeks respectable Eastern lady for matrimony. Comfortable home and prosperous future guaranteed. The words were bold and predatory, demanding an answer. Evelyn was polishing a small clock, a mechanical side skill, symbolizing her futile need to control time, when Corinna Vance knocked. Corinna was robust, her common sense honed by harsh experience, and she possessed an acrid envy for the finer, quieter desperation Evelyn embodied. "Going west, are we?" Corinna's voice was sharp. She spotted the latest letter from Silas Thorne. "He is offering air," Evelyn said, folding the elegant script defensively. "A chance for Lillian." Corinna snorted, walking past Evelyn to look pointedly at Lillian. Lillian lay pale, bundled, her breath shallow. Corinna's look was a complex mix of pity, disgust, and self-serving relief. "He's offering you servitude," Corinna scoffed, turning back to Evelyn. "A man who advertises for a wife is looking for property he doesn't have to court. And as for Lillian," Corinna paused, her lip curling slightly, "he won't tolerate a burden. You are deluding yourself into believing your sister's illness grants you special dispensation." Evelyn flinched, not from the insult, but from the raw, undeniable core of truth. "I will try to buy a future," Evelyn whispered, her voice tightening. Corinna's face hardened. "I hope you succeed, Evelyn, but I heard a rumor. Thorne is a former contract soldier in the territories. He knows how to track things. If you go, make sure you never need to come back." Corinna's final sharp warning was laced with fear, a fear that briefly transcended her envy. Silas Thorne's correspondence was the bait. His letters were eloquent, filled with sweeping, vivid descriptions of his Thorne's ridge estate. Crucially, 2 months in, he sent the music box. It was heavy, ornate, an artifact of supposed civilization. "A small token," his letter claimed, "so that you and Lillian may hear the sound of civilization." Evelyn cherished it, yet the tune, though simple, had a tinny, slightly mechanical, hollow ring that sometimes felt wrong in the stillness of the room. The daguerreotype showed Silas, respectable, meticulously bearded, a civilized monster expertly framed. 4 months later, Evelyn agreed. As they boarded the train, Lillian, frail and coughing, placed her hand on Evelyn's arm. "If anything doesn't feel right, Evelyn, we will find another way." Evelyn only focused on the clean air promised, deaf to the small inner warning. The autumn air in Fort Union hit them with the force of a physical blow. Silas was there. His eyes, devoid of the charm in his letters, delivered a cold, clinical assessment, fixing instantly on Lillian. His first words, directed solely at Evelyn, were the ultimate psychological strike. "You didn't mention she was this far gone." Evelyn managed a reply, but the image of her sister, frail and failing, had already been catalogued by Silas as a cost he intended to recoup. Thorns' citadel wasn't a home. It was a rough wooden fortress on a steep ridge. The two-story house was a cold, drafty cabin. There were no hired hands, only Silas and his silent, sullen son, Jonas, whose eyes were unsettlingly blank. "Had to liquidate," Silas said, avoiding her gaze. "Bad winter. Don't worry, I always recoup my losses." Lillian quickly declined. Evelyn begged for a doctor. Silas refused. He returned 3 days later with the scent of whiskey, claiming the medicine stores were out. Evelyn knew he hadn't tried. That night, Lillian's fever peaked. Silas demanded Evelyn attend to him. Evelyn hesitated by Lillian's side. "Your place is with your husband," Silas said, his voice flat. "I paid for you to be comfortable, not to mourn." When Evelyn resisted, he seized her wrist. "You owe me." Evelyn submitted. In that moment of paralysis, the final truth settled. Silas needed an object to control. Evelyn was not a partner. She was a failure whose only remaining purpose was to endure his power. She would now move into a state of paralyzed observation, a necessary detachment to survive and wait for the chance to retaliate. Act 2. Thorn's Citadel, revised. The architecture of despair. The state of paralyzed observation settled upon Evelyn like the persistent, bone-deep cold of the Dakota Plains. After Lillian's rapid decline, a blur of fever, hacking coughs, and Silas's indifferent contempt, Evelyn moved through her duties as a mechanism, cooking, cleaning, enduring. Her mind, once sharp with calculation, now functioned only to record details of the citadel. Thorn's citadel was not just poorly built, it was designed for isolation. It was an echoing, rough-hewn shell. The floorboards constantly shifted underfoot, creating phantom footsteps. Evelyn began to suspect that Silas had intentionally built the house in a way that the wind, or the slightest movement, created false acoustics. Silas Thorn did not need physical chains. He had the chains of psychological manipulation. His abuse was now a cold, calculated campaign against her sanity. He rarely hit her now. He preferred to undermine her reality. One morning, Evelyn organized her meager store of herbs for a cough remedy. She placed the small vials neatly on the shelf. That evening, they would be overturned. "Did you fall again, Evelyn?" Silas would ask, his voice patronizing. "You must learn to control your hands. You're clumsy when you're tired." Evelyn knew she hadn't touched the shelf. She would clean up the mess, feeling a terrifying rift open between her memory and the physical evidence. Evelyn was mending one of Silas's heavy wool coats by the light of the smoky lamp. Her nimble fingers moved automatically, a skill of civilization that seemed obscene in this wilderness. Suddenly, Silas's hand reached over her shoulder and snatched the needle. "Idle work," he scoffed, throwing the coat to the floor. "Your hands are meant for more important things." He led her roughly to the loft, his eyes flat. Later, Evelyn returned to the coat. She carefully retrieved the needle from the rough wood floor. There, next to where the needle had landed, was a tiny, sharp shard of glass. It was no bigger than a fingernail clipping, placed deliberately where she would have knelt. Had she knocked over a bottle? Was she so clumsy? The doubt was a victory for Silas. Evelyn hid the shard, keeping it as her first piece of physical evidence against her own sanity. Lillian died 3 weeks after their arrival. Not in peace, but in the throes of a final, choking seizure. The cold air of the ill-fitting window panes hastening the end. Evelyn felt no relief, only a crippling moral debt. This was the price of her ambition, her terrible choice to trust Silas's promises. Silas refused a proper burial. He dragged a simple pine coffin a short distance behind the citadel. "Wood rots," he dismissed. "Waste a coin." The true psychological terror began immediately after. Silas refused to let Evelyn mourn alone. He began his ultimate gaslighting campaign. "She was a burden, Evelyn," he stated one night, his tone dangerously rational. "You know it. You brought her here hoping the air would fail, so you could be free. Isn't that right?" Evelyn was horrified. "No, I loved her." Silas merely smiled, a cold, empty contraction of muscle. "You loved the idea of saving her. When that failed, you simply let go. She didn't die, Evelyn. You let her, and now you are mine, clean of that debt." This lie, the double lie, destroyed Evelyn's ability to trust her own motives. She was now trapped between her memory of love and Silas's plausible, brutal accusation of selfish relief. She retreated entirely. The only other person in the citadel was Jonas, Silas's son. Jonas was a silent, thin-limbed 14-year-old whose eyes were the most disturbing feature of the citadel. They were eyes of passive observation, reflecting nothing back. Jonas rarely spoke, but his presence was a constant form of surveillance. He would stand in doorways, his shadow long and thin, merely watching Evelyn work. Evelyn would often try to catch his eye, searching for any flicker of human connection or judgment. There was none. Jonas was the silent mirror to Silas's control. He was the chasm of empathy Evelyn was forced to look into every day. One bitter afternoon, Evelyn stood over the music box, still sitting on the mantelpiece, a grotesque symbol of her beautiful lie. She opened it and wound the delicate mechanism. The tinny, hollow tune began to play. Evelyn remembered Lillian, weeks before the fever, weakly asking her to stop. "It makes me feel watched, Evelyn," she'd whispered, "like someone is listening to see if I'm still breathing." Evelyn slammed the lid shut. The tune stopped, but the faint metallic chime continued to echo in her mind. Silas had told her the box was a gift. Evelyn realized it was a listening device, a psychological probe meant to establish an audio landmark for his coming control. Now the chime was locked inside her head. Evelyn's initial plan to escape was crude. Her final plan was a product of paralyzed observation. She realized she could not outsmart Silas in action. She could only outlast his vigilance. Her goal became simple: record, record, record. The finances. Silas kept a small lockbox under their bed. She began using her mechanical skill to listen to the click of the lock, recording the combination in her mind. She would slip out small, untraceable sums of silver coin, hiding them in the pocket of her dead sister's shawl, the only thing of Lillian's she still possessed. The arsenal. The hunting rifle remained loaded by the door. She noted the location of the heavy snowshoes and the harness for the wagon team, which Silas inexplicably left in the barn rather than bringing inside for security. The schedule. Silas and Jonas rode every third Saturday to a neighboring homestead for cards and whiskey. They returned irritable and hungover. The optimal window. Evelyn's body was numb, her emotions suppressed, but her mind was fiercely calculating. She was no longer trying to save herself. She was performing a final, complex maneuver of repudiation against the man who had stolen her reality. 3 weeks after Lillian's death, on the third Saturday of January, Evelyn prepared for the final movement of her biweekly routine. She retrieved an old powerful sedative she had smuggled from New Haven, a leftover prescription for Lillian. It was not enough to kill, only enough to ensure deep, lasting sleep. She added the bitter powder to the spiced hot mulled wine that Silas and Jonas drank before their departure. As the two men rode out, Evelyn didn't feel fear or triumph. She only felt the absolute necessity of the next action. She would not become a ghost haunting the citadel. Evelyn moved quickly, retrieving the hidden coins in Lillian's shawl. From a hidden floorboard, she pulled the small, fragile shard of glass, her proof against Silas's lies, and tucked it deep into her glove. She knew Silas would expect her to ride west toward known settlements. She would go east into the deadly, uncharted heart of the Shadowfell Mountains. It was madness in January, but only madness offered genuine escape from the logical control of Silas Thorne. Act 3. The Storm of Retaliation. The silence of the sleeping Evelyn felt no haste. She felt necessity. The sensation was not one of emotional release, but the cold completion of a protracted calculation. She moved through the citadel towards where Silas Thorne and Jonas slept. The sedative had worked. Silas was motionless, his face slackened into a grotesque, peaceful oblivion. Jonas was curled under a rough blanket, looking startlingly small. Evelyn ignored them. She secured the snowshoes and donned her thickest coat. As she tied the bag containing her meager food and Lillian's shawl, an inexplicable impulse pulled her back to the rifle. She took the hunting rifle from the wall, held its cold weight for a moment, and placed it on the table. This was her final repudiation of his violence. She retrieved a piece of charcoal and scrawled a single decisive word on paper. Paid. She then placed Silas's daguerreotype beside the rifle. A silent, damning verdict. The decision to leave the rifle was a declaration. She would die by freedom, not by violence. As Evelyn pulled the heavy door open, a blast of frigid wind poured in. A small sound. Jonas was standing at the threshold of the loft. The boy's eyes, normally blank, held a look of cold, contained fury. "What are you doing?" Jonas's voice was dry. "I am leaving, Jonas," Evelyn said. "You do not need to be involved." Jonas ignored her. He grabbed the braided leather strap, the tool of her beatings. He looked at her with desperate resolve. "Father says you are ours," Jonas said, his voice strained. "If you go, he will beat me to death." The horrifying truth was laid bare. Jonas was not merely a pawn, he was a victim forced to protect his abuser. Evelyn realized that by stopping her, Jonas would become Silas. He was the future Silas if left behind. The boy had to be saved from the monster he was being forced to become. Jonas lunged. The strap struck Evelyn's face, splitting her lip. The blow was born of pure, desperate fear. Her last vestige of civilized logic fractured. Survival required action. Evelyn slammed Jonas against the wooden wall. She seized the strap and lashed back, a single forceful blow driven by terrifying, immediate necessity, not malice. Jonas dropped, unconscious. Evelyn didn't stop to check him. Running quickly out the door, Evelyn made her final commitment. East, the wilderness. The wind did not howl. It screamed through her ribs like a bow across a string. Evelyn never heard the hounds at a distance. She only heard them right next to her ear. The Shadowfell wilderness was a vast, erased space, shrouded by the continuous purple storm blizzard. The immense psychological strain quickly shattered the fragile sanity she had maintained. The tinny, fragmented musical chime of the music box was the loudest thing in the silence. It echoed from somewhere just past the pines, stopping, then restarting. It was the same tune she'd once played to calm her sister. Evelyn knew it was Silas's claim, a relentless auditory probe embedded in her memory. Running faster, she desperately tried to outrun the sound. After a day and a half, the ambiguity became terror. She saw Silas's large snowshoe prints. They appeared abruptly, then vanished inexplicably into the untouched snow. Was he toying with her, or was she hallucinating his presence? Her specialized knowledge, her rationality was turning against her. Crossing a frozen stream, she saw her own reflection. Her face, exhausted and swollen. But the face instantly morphed. Her eyes widened, vacant, like Lillian's in the final seizure. "You let me freeze, Evelyn," the voice came, the sound of her hollow self-reproach. Running, blinded by snow, Evelyn no longer knew if she was escaping Silas or the psychological nightmare she carried from the citadel. She clutched the small shard of glass in her glove, the only painful physical proof that she was still connected to objective reality. By the third night, the purple storm returned in full force. Evelyn was out of food. The cold had settled into a numbing, almost pleasant oblivion. The baying of the hounds was no longer an illusion. They were close. They were real. She stumbled near a frozen creek bed. She looked up at the dark sky, feeling only acceptance. Death would be the final, total release from Silas's control, Lillian's guilt, and her own corrupted memory. She closed her eyes. Then she heard a new sound, a controlled, deliberate footfall in the snow, slow and powerful. In the last flicker of consciousness, Evelyn felt a powerful, warm hand grasp her. She opened her eyes. Standing over her was a large, bearded silhouette with sharp, dark eyes and a prominent scar across his face. It was Kaelen. His eyes met hers, not with judgment, but with a deep, weary understanding. A final, almost imperceptible, tinny echo of the music box registered in her fading mind. Evelyn clutched the shard of glass, still uncertain. Was this salvation a new psychological trap, or merely a final, merciful hallucination? Act 4, The Land of Atonement, The Burden of Salvation. Evelyn surfaced into consciousness slowly, the warmth a strange, unnerving pressure after days in the elemental cold. The air smelled of smoke, pine resin, and dried herbs. She was lying on a bed of furs in a small, concealed shelter, not a tipi, but a hollowed-out miner's dugout, expertly reinforced and hidden beneath rock and brush. This was the Whispering Haven. Her throat was raw, her body aching, but the deep, bone-gnawing cold was gone. Kaelen was tending a small fire. He was even larger than she remembered from her brief, desperate glance. His features were sharp, indicative of mixed ancestry, and the prominent scar running from his temple to his jaw was a testament to violence, either endured or delivered. He looked up, his dark eyes carrying a profound, weary sobriety. "You have pneumonia," Kaelen stated, his voice low and quiet, without any expectation of thanks. "You drank the last of the broth. You will live." Evelyn tried to speak, but only a dry rasp emerged. Her hand instinctively reached for her glove. She felt the small, sharp pressure of the glass shard. It was the only tangible link to her recent reality, her proof against the persistent psychological assault of Silas. She studied Kaelen. His movements were economical, his shelter impossibly secure. Why was he here? Why was he helping? Silas's words immediately intruded. "They're all looking for something, Evelyn. The saviors are the worst kind of traitors." Evelyn's mind, molded by Silas's domination, instantly categorized Kaelen not as a rescuer, but as a new form of threat. His quiet competence was a disguise. His generosity was a debt he intended to collect. She remained silent, adopting the state of paralyzed observation she had perfected in the Citadel, but now directing it at her alleged savior. Days blurred into weeks. Kaelen never asked her name, her story, or who was pursuing her. He simply provided. He taught her the rudimentary skills of winter survival, setting snares, identifying edible roots beneath the snow, and the importance of silence. He was a master of the Shadowfell, but he was also profoundly alone. One evening, Kaelen finally broke his silence, not with a question, but with an act of sincere vulnerability. "I was a scout before the reservation," he began, staring into the flames. "My wife, Alara, was taken to the mission school. She died there. My daughter, Emma, she followed soon after." "Consumption." Evelyn listened, the guilt over Lillian sharp and immediate. Kaelen continued, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "I hid here. I couldn't protect them, so I abandoned myself. When I found you, half frozen by the stream, I didn't see a woman. I saw my own debt." He finally looked at her. "I am not doing this for you, Evelyn. I am doing this because I need to prove that something can be saved in this wasted land." Evelyn was shaken. Kaelen was offering her not salvation, but shared grief, a concept alien to Silas's world of exploitation. Yet the deep-seated paranoia, the habit of suspicion, was too strong. "Why the scar?" Evelyn rasped out, finally finding her voice. Kaelen touched the thick white tissue on his face. "A man who chooses not to fight sometimes gets punished for the choices of others. It was a soldier, not a bear. They mistook me for a renegade." Evelyn nodded, digesting the information. She felt a flicker of genuine compassion, but immediately dismissed it. "It's a story. Silas told stories too. They are always designed to make you lower your guard." The more Kaelen showed compassion, the more Evelyn suspected the depth of his deception. She watched his sleeping form, the knife hidden beneath her furs. She had learned too well that trust was lethal. The crucible of her psychological trial came one early morning. Kaelen announced he needed to venture deeper into the mountains for better trapping lines, a trip that would last the better part of a day. Evelyn watched him leave, her anxiety spiking. Silas's voice screamed in her mind. "He's going for the bounty, Evelyn. He's found a profitable reward for his trouble." She began to search the haven, driven by the certainty of betrayal. She found nothing, no hidden gold, no maps leading to Fort Union. But near Kaelen's meager supplies, nestled among the dry herbs, she found it. A small, shiny brass button, polished and modern, certainly not belonging to Kaelen's rough frontier clothing. It was an Eastern button, a sign of contact, of civilization. Evelyn's entire psychological framework snapped into place. Kaelen was an intermediary. He had met someone. He was coordinating her capture. The kindness, the sympathy, the guilt. It was all a deliberate trap. Her memory, broken but consistent, provided the only truth. Trust is lethal. She retrieved the hunting knife and sat by the entrance, her breathing shallow. She would not be taken alive. She would not return to the citadel. She would die free of Silas's possession. When Kaelen finally returned, the sun was setting, casting long, distorted shadows into the haven. He was visibly exhausted, a slight limp in his gait. "The snow is deep," Kaelen murmured, setting down his pack. Evelyn raised the knife, her hands shaking violently, her eyes locked on his. The act was clumsy, desperate, born of pure trauma. "You met someone," Evelyn accused, her voice cracking. "The brass button. You were selling me. You were going to bring Silas here." Kaelen stopped, his eyes widening briefly in surprise, then settling into a deep sadness. He didn't raise his hands. He simply lowered his pack. "The button," Kaelen said softly, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small, rolled piece of leather secured with a thin string. "A traitor left it. He was bound for Fort Union." Kaelen unrolled the leather. Inside was a small, torn piece of canvas, not a map, but a note, written in cramped, hurried script. Evelyn recognized the handwriting instantly. Corinna Vance. The note was crude, describing a man named Silas and his hounds moving south, not east. It ended with a frantic warning. "He tracks the obvious route. Head to the high peaks. Do not return to the settlements." Corinna, her jealous, cautious friend, had sent the warning, using a small brass button as payment to a desperate traveling trader to ensure its delivery. The realization hit Evelyn with the force of an avalanche. Kaelen hadn't betrayed her. Her trauma had. Her mind, perfectly trained by Silas to anticipate treachery, had fabricated betrayal where there was only kindness. She had been on the verge of murdering the one truly good soul she had met. Evelyn dropped the knife. It clattered loudly on the stone floor. She didn't cry. She fell into a posture of complete, utter despair. Kaelen didn't pick up the knife. He didn't move towards her. He only watched, letting her moment of psychological annihilation unfold. Evelyn realized the chilling truth. She had learned Silas's methods too well. She had nearly become him, paranoid, controlling, willing to destroy the innocent to secure her own survival. The double lie was complete. Silas had successfully poisoned her ability to perceive goodness. "You were going to kill me," Kaelen stated, his tone devoid of accusation, simply observation. Evelyn could only whisper, "I believe the lie. I believe the control." Kaelen finally sat down. "The cold outside is only a mirror, Evelyn. The true cold is in how we choose to look at the world. Silas taught you that everyone wears a mask, but you must remember that you hold the knife now." He gave her time to grieve the death of her own innocence. Later, Evelyn retrieved the knife, but she used it to cut the seams of her glove. She took out the small shard of glass, her last piece of evidence against herself, and, with agonizing slowness, threw it into the roaring fire. The tiny fragment melted and disappeared into the smoke, finally releasing her from the need for proof. The act of atonement was not about saving Kaelen. It was about rejecting Silas's legacy. Weeks later, the snow began to thaw. Kaelen confirmed Silas and Jonas had abandoned the eastern hunt, moving south based on Corinna's deception. The immediate threat was gone, but the long winter had fundamentally changed Evelyn. Evelyn stood at the entrance of the haven. She was strong, hardened by the experience, her eyes now clear. She took the silver ring, the small, final symbol of hope, off her finger. It was no longer a symbol of hope or debt, but a testament to the scars that had healed. She did not seek the settlements. She did not seek civilization. She chose to walk north, deeper into the unsettled territories. Kaelen watched her go, neither asking her to stay nor offering to join. Evelyn Hayes had completed her journey. She was no longer running from Silas. She was no longer running from Lillian. She was walking forward alone, bearing her trauma, forever changed by the wasted land. A survivor who had finally chosen to define her own reality.